talk. This is not advice. And this is definitely not content to play in the background. This is a conversation you need to sit with. Because if you've been feeling restless lately, if focus feels harder than it used to, if silence feels uncomfortable, and even after resting, you still feel tired, there's nothing wrong with you. Something is wrong with the way we live. We are surrounded by noise, information, stimulation, and constant demand for attention. And slowly, without realizing it, our minds have adapted to chaos. This episode is about that, about how the world trained our brains to stay distracted and what it's costing us emotionally. No visuals, no slides. Just one voice, one mind, and one long, honest conversation. Listen slowly, pause when you need to, and don't rush to finish it. Because reclaiming your attention might be the most important thing you do this year.
Let me ask you something, and don't answer it quickly. Don't answer it like you answer Instagram polls. Sit with it for a second. When was the last time you did nothing and felt okay about it? Not scrolling, not listening to something, not checking messages, not multitasking, just nothing. If that question made you uncomfortable, good, because that discomfort is not random. It's a signal. Something inside us has changed. Quietly, slowly, without permission. And most of us didn't even notice it happening. We just woke up one day and realized we're tired. Not physically tired. Mentally tired. Emotionally tired. A kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. We blame age. We blame work. We blame responsibility. We blame adulthood. But deep down, we know that's not the full truth. Because even on holidays, even on weekends, even on days when nothing is demanded from us, our mind still feels noisy, still restless, still unable to sit still. And we tell ourselves, this is normal, this is life now. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This is not normal, it's just common. There's a difference. Think about your day. You wake up. Before your feet touch the floor, your hand reaches for your phone. Not because you need it, because your brain expects it. Notifications, messages, missed calls, news, content. Your mind hasn't even fully woken up, and it's already reacting, already consuming, already stimulated. And from that moment onwards, your attention doesn't belong to you anymore. It's borrowed, fragmented, pulled in 100 directions, and you call this starting the day. We don't realize how unnatural this is, because everyone is doing it. On the bus, in the metro, in the office lift, at traffic signals. Look around. 10 people standing together. 10 different worlds inside 10 different screens. Silence used to connect people. Now it isolates them. And what's scary is we're not even aware of what we've lost. Because you can't miss something. You slowly forgot how to feel. Let me say this clearly. You are not weak for feeling distracted. You are not lazy for feeling unmotivated. You are not broken for feeling restless. You are overstimulated. There is a difference. And until we understand that difference, we'll keep blaming ourselves for a problem we didn't create. There was a time when boredom was normal. Standing in a queue was boring. Waiting for a bus was boring. Long train journeys were boring. And boredom wasn't the enemy. It was space. Space where thoughts wandered. Space where imagination grew. Space where self-reflection happened. That space is gone now. Every gap is filled. Waiting room, scroll. Lift ride, scroll. 5 minutes free, scroll. We've trained ourselves to never let the mind be still. And then we're surprised when it doesn't know how to rest. Here's something nobody talks about. When you remove boredom from life, you also remove depth. Depth needs silence. Depth needs slowness. Depth needs discomfort. But we've created a life where the moment discomfort appears, we escape into our phones, into content, into noise, and slowly, unknowingly, we've lost the ability to sit with ourselves. That's why people feel lonely, even when they're constantly connected. That's why anxiety shows up without any clear reason. That's why emotions feel overwhelming or completely numb. Let me describe a moment that almost everyone here has experienced. You finish your work for the day. You sit on the bed. You finally have time. And instead of feeling relaxed, your mind starts racing. Thoughts you ignored all day suddenly show up. Regrets, comparisons, what ifs, unanswered questions. And before it gets uncomfortable, your hand reaches for the phone. Not because you want entertainment, but because you want escape. And that's the moment something important happens. You teach your brain one lesson. Discomfort is dangerous. Avoid it. You do this enough times, and your brain stops trusting silence. Silence starts feeling unsafe. And that's when rest stops being restful. This generation doesn't know how to be bored. And because of that, this generation doesn't know how to be deeply creative, deeply present, or deeply calm. We know how to react. We don't know how to sit. Let me be very honest here. The problem is not your phone. The phone is just the delivery system. The real issue is what constant stimulation has done to the way our brain works. Depth needs discomfort. But we've created a life where the moment discomfort appears, we escape into our phones, into content, into noise, and slowly, unknowingly, we've lost the ability to sit with ourselves. That's why people feel lonely, even when they're constantly connected. That's why anxiety shows up without any clear reason. That's why emotions feel overwhelming or completely numb. Let me describe a moment that almost everyone here has experienced. You finish your work for the day. You sit on the bed. You finally have time. And instead of feeling relaxed, your mind starts racing. Thoughts you ignored all day suddenly show up. Regrets, comparisons, what ifs, unanswered questions. And before it gets uncomfortable, your hand reaches for the phone. Not because you want entertainment, but because you want escape. And that's the moment something important happens. You teach your brain one lesson. Discomfort is dangerous. Avoid it. You do this enough times, and your brain stops trusting silence. Silence starts feeling unsafe. And that's when rest stops being restful. This generation doesn't know how to be bored. And because of that, this generation doesn't know how to be deeply creative, deeply present, or deeply calm. We know how to react. We don't know how to sit. Let me be very honest here. The problem is not your phone. The phone is just the delivery system. The real issue is what constant stimulation has done to the way our brain works. Your mind was never designed to process this much information. News from 10 countries, opinions from 1,000 strangers, achievements of people you've never met, all before breakfast. And we wonder why the mind feels overloaded. There's a reason you feel mentally tired. Even on days when you didn't do much, your brain has been working non-stop, processing, switching, reacting. From one app to another, from one thought to another, from one emotion to another. No closure, no pause, just endless input. That's not restlessness. That's mental exhaustion. And here's the most dangerous part. We've started confusing stimulation with happiness. If something keeps us engaged, we assume it's good for us. But stimulation is not nourishment. Junk food is stimulating too. It doesn't mean it's healthy. You can consume content all day and still feel empty at night because attention scattered everywhere never reaches inward. And when attention doesn't reach inward, self-understanding disappears. Let me slow this down. Your attention is not just a mental resource. It is an emotional resource. Where your attention goes, your emotions follow. And if your attention is constantly outside, your emotional world becomes unstable. That's why people feel reactive now. Small things irritate them. Minor delays frustrate them. Tiny inconveniences feel unbearable. Patience has reduced. Not because people are bad, but because their minds are tired. We've created a lifestyle where the mind never finishes anything. We start a video, then jump to another. We read half an article, then scroll. We listen to half a song, then skip. And slowly, this pattern spreads. Half attention, half listening, half presence. And then relationships start feeling shallow. Because deep connection requires full attention. You can't listen deeply. If your mind is trained to move every 5 seconds, you can't feel deeply. If you escape discomfort instantly, you can't live deeply. If you never slow down. Here's a hard question. If you remove all distractions, all content, all noise, what remains? Many people don't want to know the answer, because what remains is unresolved emotion, unprocessed fear, unacknowledged dissatisfaction. And instead of dealing with that, we distract ourselves again and again and again. That's why silence feels scary. Not because silence is empty, but because silence is honest. It shows you what you've been avoiding. Let me say this gently. Your discomfort is not the enemy. Your avoidance is. We live in a world that constantly tells us to consume. Consume content. Consume motivation. Consume productivity hacks. Consume entertainment. But nobody teaches us how to digest, how to process thoughts, how to sit with emotions, how to rest the mind. So we keep consuming, hoping the next thing will fix the emptiness. It doesn't. It only distracts us from it. And here's the irony. The more distracted we become, the more we crave meaning. The more we scroll, the more we feel lost. The more connected we are digitally, the more disconnected we feel internally. This is not coincidence. This is consequence. Let me be very clear about something. This is not a motivational talk. I'm not here to tell you to delete all apps, wake up at 4 a.m., or become some extreme version of discipline. That's not real life. This is a real conversation about how a hyper-stimulated world has quietly reshaped our minds, and before we can fix anything, we need to see it clearly. Right now, you don't need solutions, you need awareness. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you understand what's happening, the self-blame starts dissolving. You're not behind in life. You're overwhelmed. You're not unfocused. You're overstimulated. You're not unmotivated. You're mentally exhausted. And acknowledging that is not weakness, it's clarity. In the next part, we're going to talk about how this happened, not emotionally, systemically. How the world quietly trained your brain to function this way, without asking you, without warning you, without preparing you. And once you see that, everything starts making sense. For now, just sit with this. Notice how often your mind wants to escape. Notice how quickly you reach for stimulation, not to judge yourself, but to understand yourself, because attention is the foundation of everything else. And right now, it's under attack. Let's shift the lens now. Because if Act 1 was about what you're feeling, Act 2 is about why you're feeling it. And this is important. Because the moment you understand the why, self-blame starts to loosen its grip. We need to stop seeing distraction as a personal weakness and start seeing it as a trained behavior. You were not born restless. A child can sit and stare at ants for 10 minutes. A child can repeat the same game again and again without getting bored. Restlessness is not natural, it is learned. So let's talk about how the world trained your brain. Not aggressively, not violently, but subtly. Like water shaping stone, we live in what is called the attention economy. Don't worry about the term. The idea is simple. In the past, companies competed for money. Today, they compete for your attention. Because attention leads to time. Time leads to habits. Habits lead to dependency. Dependency leads to profit. Think about this carefully. If you open an app and close it within 10 seconds, that app has failed. But if you open it and lose track of time, that app has succeeded. Your peace is not their goal. Your presence is. So everything is designed to keep you engaged. Endless scroll, autoplay, notifications that arrive just in time. Not too many to annoy you. Not too few to forget you. Perfectly calibrated interruption. And your brain, being efficient, adapts. The human brain is brilliant, but it has one weakness. It optimizes for what it repeatedly experiences. If you repeatedly switch tasks, your brain gets good at switching. If you repeatedly consume short bursts of content, your brain gets used to short bursts. And then one day, you ask it to focus deeply, and it struggles. Not because it's broken, because it was trained differently. This is where dopamine comes in. And let's clear one thing right now. Dopamine is not happiness. Dopamine is not joy. Dopamine is anticipation. It's the feeling of something interesting might happen. That's why notifications work so well. You don't know what it is, but you want to check. Every swipe, every refresh, every scroll releases a small amount of dopamine. Not enough to satisfy you, just enough to keep you going, like tasting food, but never being allowed to eat properly. Over time, your brain starts craving stimulation, not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar. Stillness feels unfamiliar. Silence feels suspicious. Focus feels effortful. Now here's where things get dangerous. When dopamine becomes your default state, ordinary life starts feeling dull. Reading a book feels slow. Conversations feel boring. Waiting feels unbearable. Life hasn't changed. Your baseline has. And instead of asking, why does my mind feel restless? We ask, why is everything so boring? We blame the world. But the issue is inside. This is why multitasking feels productive. Your brain gets rewarded for switching. Emails, messages, videos, work, notifications, constant novelty, constant movement. But here's the cost. Every switch leaves residue. A part of your attention stays behind. So when you finally try to focus on one thing, you're only partially there, mentally fragmented. That's why you read the same paragraph 3 times. That's why you forget what someone just said. That's why your mind feels scattered, even when you're trying your best. This is not lack of effort. This is trained fragmentation. And let's talk about motivation, because everyone feels unmotivated these days. But motivation doesn't die randomly. It dies when the reward system gets hijacked. Earlier, effort led to reward. You worked hard. You achieved something. You felt good. Now, Reward comes without effort. Scroll up, oh, dopamine. Like dopamine. Notification, hue dopamine. Your brain learns a new equation. Why struggle? When stimulation is available instantly. So when real life asks for effort, your brain resists. Not because you're lazy, because effort feels inefficient compared to instant stimulation. And society makes it worse. We glorify busyness. We celebrate multitasking. We praise being always on. We confuse availability with productivity and deep work with laziness. Even education systems contribute. Short attention spans in classrooms. Constant evaluation. No space to think slowly. Children trained early to jump from one subject to another without depth. Then we wonder, why adults struggle with focus? Let me bring this closer to home. Think about family gatherings. Earlier, people talked. Now, people sit together and scroll separately. No one planned this. It just happened. Because silence felt awkward and phones filled the gap. And here's the most subtle training of all. Validation, likes, views, comments, tiny signals telling you that you're seen. And the brain loves being seen, so it starts seeking approval. Not consciously, but habitually. And when approval becomes external, self-worth becomes unstable. That's why people check who viewed their story. That's why numbers affect mood. That's why comparison feels automatic. You didn't choose this. You were conditioned into it. Let me say something important here. None of this makes you weak. It makes you human. The system is designed around human psychology, and it works because it understands us. The real tragedy is this. We live in the most connected era in history, yet people feel more mentally isolated than ever because connection without attention is not connection. And the more distracted we become, the harder it is to sit with discomfort. So emotions pile up. Stress without release, anxiety without clarity, sadness without processing, and then one day it feels like too much. This is why burnout happens, even without extreme work. Because burnout is not always about workload. Sometimes it's about mental overload without rest. And rest is not scrolling. Rest is when the mind is allowed to finish a thought. When attention is not pulled away. When the nervous system calms down. But we've trained ourselves to interrupt rest. We lie down and scroll. We wait and scroll. We feel uncomfortable and scroll. And then we say, I never feel rested. Of course you don't. You never let rest happen. This act is not about blaming technology. Technology is neutral. The issue is unconscious use, and unconscious habits shape conscious experience. Here's the hard truth. If you don't decide where your attention goes, something else will, and it won't care about your mental health. In the next act, we'll talk about the emotional cost of all this, the anxiety, the numbness, the loneliness, not as diagnoses, but as consequences. Because once you understand the cost, you start valuing attention differently. For now, just notice one thing, how often your mind seeks stimulation, not because it's curious, but because it's uncomfortable. That awareness alone is the beginning of change. There's something we need to talk about now. Something most people feel but struggle to explain. It's not dramatic, and it's not always visible, but it's heavy. It shows up as a constant sense of unease. A feeling of being mentally on edge, even when nothing is actually wrong. Not panic, not fear, just restlessness that sits quietly in the background of life. You wake up fine. The day goes fine. Nothing bad happens. Yet by evening, you feel drained, emotionally empty. And when someone asks what happened, you don't know what to say because nothing happened. And that's what makes it confusing. This is the emotional cost of constant stimulation. Not immediate pain, but slow erosion. When your attention is constantly pulled outward, your emotional processing gets interrupted. Feelings don't get completed, they get postponed. Stress doesn't release, it accumulates. Sadness doesn't get felt, it gets buried. And buried emotions don't disappear. They wait. That's why people feel anxious without knowing why. That's why moods change suddenly. That's why irritation shows up over small things. It's not about that moment. It's about everything that never got processed before it. Earlier, people had fewer distractions, which meant they had more emotional contact with themselves. They thought more. They felt more. Not always comfortably, but fully. Now, we avoid feeling, and avoidance always comes with a price. Let me describe a familiar night. You lie down after a long day, lights off, and suddenly your mind becomes loud. Thoughts you didn't think about all day start speaking. Things you said. Things you didn't say. Things you should have done. Things you're afraid of. And you feel that tightening in your chest. So you reach for your phone. Not because you're addicted, but because you're overwhelmed. Your phone becomes an emotional pacifier, like giving a crying child a toy. The crying stops, but the reason for crying is still there. This pattern repeats daily, so emotions never get closure. They stack up, and one day they spill out as anxiety or numbness or burnout. Let's talk about numbness, because many people don't feel anxious. They feel nothing. They say things like, I don't feel excited about anything anymore, or I don't feel deeply sad either, or I just feel blank. This is not peace. This is emotional fatigue. When the mind is overstimulated for too long, it protects itself by dulling sensation. It's like lowering the volume because the noise is constant. You feel less not because life is empty, but because your nervous system is tired. This affects relationships deeply because connection requires presence and presence requires attention. Have you noticed how people listen now? They wait for their turn to speak. They half listen. They get distracted mid-conversation, not intentionally, habitually, and slowly. Relationships start feeling shallow, even long-term ones. People say, I feel lonely even when I'm with people. That's not loneliness of company. That's loneliness of connection. There's something else we rarely admit. Men and women often experience this differently. Men often feel emotionally blocked. They don't know what they're feeling, only that something is off. Women often feel emotionally overloaded. Too many feelings, too much thinking, too much self-doubt. Different expressions, same root cause, lack of mental stillness. Now add social comparison to this, endless exposure to other people's lives, their highlights, their achievements, their confidence. Your mind starts measuring itself constantly, even when you don't want to, and comparison quietly erodes self-worth. Earlier, you compared yourself to a small circle. Now, you compare yourself to the world. That's not fair, and it's not healthy. This leads to a strange emotional state. You're never fully satisfied because there's always someone doing more. You're never fully at rest because there's always something happening. So you exist in between, not unhappy, not content, just unsettled. Let's talk about overthinking. Many people believe they are overthinkers. But overthinking is often under feeling. When emotions aren't processed fully, they turn into repetitive thoughts. The mind keeps circling the same ideas because the feeling underneath was never resolved. Stillness would help, but stillness feels uncomfortable. So the loop continues. Then there's loneliness, not the obvious kind, but the quiet kind. The kind where you have people around, messages coming in, notifications buzzing, yet you feel unseen. Because being seen is not about attention. It's about being understood. And understanding requires depth. Depth requires time. Time requires focus. This is why people crave deep conversations now. Why podcasts feel comforting. Why long-form content resonates. Because somewhere inside, people are tired of surface-level noise. They want meaning. They want slowness. They want honesty. Let me say this clearly. Your anxiety is not a personal flaw. Your numbness is not a lack of gratitude. Your restlessness is not a motivation problem. These are emotional responses to a distracted life. Ignoring them won't make them go away. Drowning them in content won't heal them. They need space. But space feels scary because it forces us to feel. And feeling feels unfamiliar. Here's a gentle truth. The emotions you're avoiding are not trying to harm you. They're trying to be heard. And the more you listen, the quieter they become. In the next act, we'll talk about silence, why it feels uncomfortable, why people avoid it, and why learning to sit with silence is one of the most powerful skills in the modern world. For now, just notice your emotional patterns, not to fix them, just to see them. Because awareness is the beginning of peace. Silence used to be normal. It wasn't something people chased, but it also wasn't something they feared. It was just there between moments, between conversations, between tasks. Now silence feels heavy, uncomfortable, almost threatening. And most of us don't even know why. We just know that the moment things go quiet, something inside us wants to fill that gap immediately. A phone, a voice, a sound, anything. The fear of silence is not really about silence. Silence itself doesn't hurt anyone. What we are afraid of is what silence brings to the surface. Because when external noise disappears, internal noise becomes louder. Thoughts we have been postponing begin to speak. Emotions we have been avoiding begin to rise. Questions we didn't want to ask ourselves start forming clearly. Silence removes distractions, and distractions were doing an important job for us, keeping us away from ourselves. In earlier times, silence was part of daily life. Long walks, waiting without stimulation, sitting alone without pressure to perform or react. That gave people natural pauses to process life. Today, we have removed those pauses completely. Every empty moment is filled before it can do its work. And because of that, we've lost tolerance for stillness. Not because stillness is bad, but because it is unfamiliar. When silence arrives now, it doesn't feel peaceful. It feels awkward, like something is wrong, like time is being wasted, like you should be doing something. And that discomfort is not random. It's the result of years of conditioning. A mind trained on constant input feels unsafe without it. Just like eyes adjusted to bright light struggle in the dark, a stimulated mind struggles in silence. This is why people avoid being alone. Not physically alone, emotionally alone. Even when someone is by themselves, they are rarely alone with their thoughts. Music plays, videos run, podcasts fill the air. Not because these things are bad, but because silence feels too exposed. It leaves no place to hide. And hiding has become a habit. Silence forces honesty. When nothing distracts you, you start noticing what you're dissatisfied with. You notice the relationships that don't feel right, the work that doesn't feel meaningful, the exhaustion you've been ignoring. Silence doesn't create these problems. It reveals them. And revelation is uncomfortable when we're not ready to act on it. That's why many people say they feel uneasy when they sit quietly. Not anxious in a dramatic sense, but unsettled. Like something needs to be fixed immediately. That urge is not urgency. It's avoidance. The mind looking for stimulation so it doesn't have to sit with unresolved feelings. We've also attached identity to noise. Being busy feels important. Being reachable feels necessary. Being constantly updated feels responsible. Silence, in comparison, feels unproductive, like you're falling behind. And so, choosing stillness feels like rebellion in a world that rewards movement. There's also fear of insignificance hidden here. When everything goes quiet, there is no external validation, no likes, no messages, no reactions, just you. And for a generation raised on feedback loops, that can feel like disappearing. Silence makes you confront the difference between being seen and being present, between attention from others and attention to yourself. This is why many people can't sleep without background noise. Why they scroll until their eyes close. Why they wake up already stimulated. Because silence feels like being alone with unanswered questions. And unanswered questions feel heavier than noise. But here is the truth we avoid. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is space. And space is necessary for anything to settle. Without space, thoughts collide. Emotions overlap. The mind never finishes anything. Silence is where the mind completes cycles. It's where feelings resolve instead of looping endlessly. The reason silence feels scary is not because it harms us, but because it asks something from us. It asks presence. It asks courage. It asks us to witness ourselves without filters. And that's difficult when we've spent years outsourcing our attention. Silence also slows time. When you are distracted, hours disappear without memory. When you are silent, minutes feel long, and that can feel uncomfortable in a culture obsessed with speed. But that slowness is not inefficiency. It's awareness. Time feels longer because you are actually inside it. Avoiding silence keeps life shallow, not intentionally, but inevitably. Depth needs uninterrupted attention. Whether it's a conversation, a thought, a relationship, or self-understanding. Silence is the doorway to that depth, and the more we avoid it, the harder depth becomes. This doesn't mean you need to sit in silence for hours or isolate yourself from the world. That's not realistic. It means noticing how quickly you escape quiet moments. It means recognizing that discomfort and stillness is not danger, it's unfamiliarity. And unfamiliarity fades with practice. The moment you stop running from silence, something changes. Not immediately. At first, the mind becomes louder, more chaotic. That's normal. That's everything you've been postponing finally getting a chance to speak. But if you stay a little longer, the noise settles. Thoughts slow down. Emotions soften. And underneath all of it, there is clarity. Silence doesn't solve your problems, but it shows you which ones matter. And that alone is powerful. In the next act, we won't talk about extreme discipline or unrealistic habits. We'll talk about how to reclaim attention gently, practically, without fighting the world or yourself. Because the goal is not to escape modern life, but to live consciously within it. For now, just notice this. The next time things go quiet, resist the urge to fill the space immediately. Stay for a moment longer than you usually do. Not to fix anything, just to listen. That's where everything begins. By now, something should feel different. Not dramatically different, but quieter. Like a room where the noise has been turned down slightly. That's important because reclaiming attention doesn't begin with force. It begins with awareness. And awareness creates space. Space is where change happens. Most conversations about focus turn aggressive very quickly. Delete this, quit that. Wake up early. Discipline harder. But attention doesn't respond well to violence. You can't shout your mind into calmness. The more you fight distraction, the stronger it becomes. Because distraction is not rebellion. It's habit. Reclaiming attention is less about control and more about relationship. The relationship you have with your own mind. And like any relationship, it improves through patience, not domination. The first thing to understand is that your attention is not infinite. Treating it like it is leads to exhaustion. Every notification, every conversation, every decision draws from the same mental pool. When that pool is constantly drained, even simple tasks feel heavy. That's why some days feel overwhelming even when nothing big happens. So the shift begins with respect. Respecting your mental energy. Respecting your limits. This doesn't mean doing less in life. It means doing less at the same time. One of the simplest but most powerful changes is learning to do one thing fully. Not perfectly, fully. When you eat, eat. When you listen, listen. When you work, work. This sounds obvious, but it's deeply unnatural in a distracted culture. At first, your mind will resist. It will wander. That's not failure. That's withdrawal. A distracted mind doesn't calm down immediately. It fidgets. It looks for stimulation. It tries to escape. The mistake people make is assuming something is wrong when this happens. Nothing is wrong. This is the mind relearning how to stay. Another important shift is redefining productivity. Productivity is not how much you do. It's how present you are while doing it. A distracted hour produces less than a focused 20 minutes. Yet we reward the appearance of busyness over actual effectiveness. We feel productive when we're occupied, not when we're clear. This is why rest must be intentional, not passive consumption, not scrolling, not background noise. Rest means allowing the mind to slow down without input. At first, this will feel boring. That boredom is not emptiness, it's recovery. Boredom is the nervous system returning to baseline. It's the mind saying, I don't need stimulation right now. And that state is where creativity, insight, and emotional processing happen naturally. Many people are afraid of boredom because they associate it with laziness. But boredom is not laziness. It's unstructured space. And unstructured space is essential for mental health. Another quiet but powerful practice is reducing decision overload. Modern life demands too many small decisions. What to watch, what to reply, what to react to, what to consume. Each decision drains attention. Simplifying choices frees mental energy. This is why routines feel calming. Not because they're rigid, but because they remove unnecessary decisions. When the basics are automated, the mind has space for deeper thinking. Reclaiming attention also means learning when not to engage. Not every message needs an immediate response. Not every thought needs analysis. Not every feeling needs action. Pausing before reacting creates a buffer. That buffer is where wisdom lives. One of the most important skills in this process is learning to sit with mild discomfort, not extreme suffering. Just mild unease. The urge to check the phone. The restlessness in silence, the awkwardness of waiting, these moments are training grounds. Each time you stay a little longer, your tolerance grows. And with tolerance comes freedom. Freedom from impulsive reactions, freedom from constant stimulation, freedom from mental exhaustion. Attention is also deeply connected to values. When you're clear about what matters, distractions lose some of their power. Not because they disappear, but because they no longer dominate. Clarity creates boundaries naturally. This is why people feel more focused when they care deeply about something. Purpose stabilizes attention, not grand purpose, simple meaning, knowing why you're doing what you're doing. Another important aspect is physical presence. The body and mind are not separate. A restless body feeds a restless mind. Gentle movement, walking, stretching, breathing, these ground attention in the present moment. Not as techniques, but as reminders that you are here. Reclaiming attention doesn't require changing your entire lifestyle. It requires small, consistent shifts. One less distraction, one more pause, one moment of presence. Over time, these moments compound. The goal is not to eliminate distraction. That's unrealistic. The goal is to reduce unconscious distraction, to choose where your attention goes instead of losing it automatically. And when you start choosing, something changes inside. You feel less scattered, less reactive, more rooted. Life doesn't become easier, but it becomes clearer. And clarity reduces suffering more than comfort ever could. Reclaiming attention is an act of self-respect. It's saying that your inner world matters, that your peace is worth protecting, that your mind is not a marketplace for every passing thought or notification. In the final act, we'll talk about what it means to live deeply in a shallow age. Not by rejecting modern life, but by engaging with it consciously. Because depth is not about escape, it's about presence. For now, notice this: every time you bring your attention back, gently, without judgment, you are already practicing the skill that matters most in this era. By this point, the problem is clear, not intellectually, but internally. You don't just understand distraction anymore, you feel it. And that's important, because change that begins in the mind rarely lasts. Change that begins in awareness does. We live in a shallow age. Fast information, quick opinions, instant reactions, everything optimized for speed, visibility, and volume. And in such a world, depth can feel like a disadvantage. Being slow looks unambitious. Being quiet looks irrelevant. Being thoughtful looks inefficient. But these are illusions created by noise. Depth has not lost its value. It has simply become rare. And anything rare becomes powerful. Living deeply today does not mean rejecting technology, society, or modern life. It means refusing to live unconsciously inside them. It means choosing presence in a world that profits from your absence. It means deciding that your inner life is not secondary to your outer performance. Depth begins with attention. Not attention as effort, but attention as care. Where you place your attention is where you place your life. If your attention is scattered, your life feels scattered. If your attention is anchored, your life feels grounded. A deep life is not a dramatic life. It is not constant happiness or permanent calm. It is a life where emotions are felt fully instead of avoided, where moments are experienced instead of escaped, where meaning is built slowly instead of chased frantically. People often ask how to find purpose. Purpose is not found by searching harder. It emerges when attention stops being divided. When you give something your full presence, work, relationships, learning, creating, meaning grows naturally. Purpose is a byproduct of depth. One of the quiet shifts that happens when you live deeply is that comparison weakens, not because you become superior or detached, but because you become occupied with your own experience. When your attention is rooted in your life, other people's lives lose their grip on your self-worth. Another shift is patience. Not forced patience, but natural patience. When the mind is not constantly overstimulated, waiting stops feeling like punishment. Delays stop feeling personal. Time stretches. And with that stretch comes emotional resilience. Living deeply also changes how you relate to success. Success stops being about visibility and starts being about alignment. You care less about how things look and more about how they feel. Less about speed, more about sustainability. Less about approval, more about integrity. This is especially important in a world that constantly encourages performance. Performance is exhausting when it's disconnected from presence. Depth allows you to show up fully without pretending. And authenticity, when it comes from stillness, is not loud. It's steady. A deep life is built through small daily choices. Choosing to listen fully instead of half listening. Choosing to pause instead of react. Choosing to finish thoughts instead of interrupting them with stimulation. These choices don't look impressive from the outside, but internally they change everything. Depth also brings back joy in simple things. Not intense excitement, but quiet satisfaction. A conversation that lingers, a walk that feels complete, a moment of silence that doesn't need filling. These experiences don't go viral, but they make life feel whole. There will always be noise. There will always be distractions. The world will not slow down for you, but you can slow down within it. And that inner slowness becomes an anchor, a place you return to no matter how chaotic things become. Living deeply does not mean withdrawing from ambition. It means choosing conscious ambition. Ambition that respects your limits. That values clarity over chaos. That understands that burning out is not proof of dedication. As your attention becomes more intentional, your energy follows. You stop leaking it into unnecessary worry, constant reaction, and endless consumption. And suddenly, you have more energy, not because life is easier, but because it's more focused. This is what reclaiming attention ultimately gives you. Not control over life, but companionship with yourself. The ability to be with your own thoughts without panic. The ability to feel emotions without drowning in them. The ability to sit in silence without fear. And perhaps the most important shift of all, you stop feeling like life is slipping past you. Moments stop blurring together. Days stop disappearing. You remember experiences not because they were exciting, but because you were present for them. That is depth. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It doesn't compete. It stays. So if there is one thing to carry forward from this entire conversation, let it be this: your attention is not just a skill to improve. It is a relationship to protect. With your mind, with your emotions, with your life. Protect it gently. Return to it often. And trust that a quieter mind leads to a clearer life. You don't need more content. You don't need more stimulation. You don't need more speed. You need more presence. And that is always available.
If you're still here, don't rush away. Just take a breath. Nothing dramatic needs to happen after this. You don't need to change your life overnight. You don't need to delete everything or become someone new. Awareness is enough for now. Because once you see how your attention works, you start noticing where it leaks, where it gets pulled, where it gets exhausted. And slowly, without force, you begin to protect it. If this conversation resonated with you, don't treat it like content. Treat it like a mirror. Come back to it when the noise feels loud. Share it with someone who feels overwhelmed but can't explain why. And remember this, you don't need more stimulation. You don't need more speed. You don't need more content. You need more presence. And that is something no algorithm can take from you. This is Brotomedia. Thank you for listening.